2022 for the Laramie City Council. It's 6 p.m. and we'll go ahead and get started. The first item for the work session agenda, as always, is public comment on non-agenda items. Let's see if we have any. All right, seeing no requests for public comment on non-agenda items, we'll just get into the work session. Tonight's work session is about leash laws and signage. We have Assistant Chief Robert Terry with us. We have Officer Bingham from Laramie Animal Control. This work session is coming, I think, Council, at our request because a few months ago it seemed like we were getting an influx of communication around this topic. So if that helps, oh, and Chief Brown's here too. Welcome. I didn't see you until just now. So if that helps background for our folks from LPD, Animal Shelter, a little bit, that's what was the genesis of this. Now, I haven't seen much of that lately, but that doesn't mean it won't happen again. And it seemed to come in kind of a wave at the time, and I haven't heard much about it since then, but that's why this work session was requested, if that's at all helpful to anybody here in terms of background. So with that said, I don't have anybody identified other than Assistant Chief Terry to get us started. So I'm going to turn it over to the Assistant Chief to kind of get us started on this, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. So we were asked to talk about leash laws and signage and complaints to particularly the council. I reached out to Teresa Bingham, who you know is a CSO or an animal control officer that's worked for Laramie for many years, and I would consider her more of the subject matter expert on what we'd like to talk about tonight. So I invited her, and she's going to do primarily all the talking. We did prepare a PowerPoint so we can have a visual to show at least the call load and maybe just put it in perspective what type of calls we're handling, how many we're handling, and maybe a disposition on those calls. So unless you got any immediate questions, we can bring up the PowerPoint, and I'm going to request that we turn it over to CSO Bingham and let her guide you through her PowerPoint.
All right. So let me, and I'm not super awesome at this, so there we go. Okay, so just kind of an introduction to what's going on, what we're doing. Like Robert said, you know, just kind of give you some background and our perspective on leash law enforcement and all that fun stuff. So as we pop over, so Division of Animal Control is part of the Laramie Police Department. Last year, we responded to almost 1,100 calls. Annually, when I look up our calls over the last 5 years, anywhere between 1,000 calls and 1,600 calls annually are specific to the Animal Control Division and animal-related calls. As our primary duty, we take all sorts of animal-related calls, including nuisance animals, both domestic and livestock. We take animal cruelty calls, animal bites, sick and injured wildlife, as well as wildlife that's gotten into people's residences that should not be. So basically, if you can think of an animal-related problem, we deal with it inside city limits. In addition to our animal-related calls for service, we also run the Laramie Animal Shelter. So we are responsible as animal control officers to also take care of the critters in the shelter. We do the building maintenance, we deal with adoptions, redemptions, we handle our licensing program, we do education programs out to the public for both grade school ages all the way up through adults. I've done Leadership Laramie presentations and various other adults education programs. We also run our volunteer program, which helps get our dogs out for walks. It gives our cats snuggle time. It gives all of our various animals more time with people, not just stuck in their kennels throughout the day, weeks on end to make sure that they're coming out better, well-rounded animals at the time of adoption. Our officers are on duty Monday through Friday from 10 to 6. We run shelter hours from 1 to 5:30 for the general public to come in for various things, for those adoptions, for licensing, for redemptions, all that fun stuff. And on average, we run at least typically about 5,000 visitors per year coming through the shelter, signing in, and having various modes of business here at the shelter. We are available for call-outs outside of those hours for emergency sort of situations. So animals hit by car, for vicious animals, for those weird scenarios that the officers, the regular PD officers, just are not trained for, or it's not safe, so they call in our expertise. In 2016, our budget was reduced, and that was across the board. There were reductions across the city. During that time, we lost our supervisor, who was Officer Amron. He was our supervisor as well as an animal control officer. Since that reduction, that lack, so we went from 4 officers down to 3 officers. So rather than maintaining our 7-day-a-week on-call status, patrol, and shelter operations, we've had to cut back down to 5 days a week in order to be able to maintain the programs that we currently do. But we did have to reduce some of those programs as well. We do less patrol by a significant amount because more of our time is spent in the shelter and responding to calls rather than patrolling, making sure dogs are on leash, making sure that those stray dogs that have gotten out, when people aren't home, make their way home. So we're not as proactive as we were previously able to be. So, as our city ordinance basically points out, so our definition for at-large is any animal which is off its premises of the owner, whether it's public or private, without permission of the private property owner. Essentially, and this includes potbelly pigs as well as cats, because that's how the ordinance is written as far as indoor outdoor animals. But they have to be maintained under control when they're off their property by a leash that is less than 10 feet and by somebody who is capable of managing that animal. So if we have a dog dragging a kid down the street, that animal is not under control. So that's where we added some of that, the ability to control the animal while off its property. It's also in there that a dog is not at large when it is being trained within a training area established by the Parks and Rec Board, as well as in areas and times established by the Parks and Rec Board. So that has been something that we've worked in conjunction with them. We look at the animal recommendations, what's, appropriate for healthy, social animals, dogs specifically, to have that proper energy outlets to allow owners to socialize, exercise, and train their dogs. And then the Parks and Rec Board looks at what's available inside city limits that can be maintained and established across the board. General violations, essentially it's, you're not supposed to, obviously, allow your animal to be a nuisance. It can be on the testimony of a witness or an animal control officer. If I see your dog running off leash down through the park, accosting people, I can issue a citation. I don't have to have a complaint from the public in order to be able to make contact with a person. It's on our observations or a complaint from the general public. Some quick stats. So essentially, of the calls that we took in 2021, the 10,000 or the 1,093 animal calls, of those we had 17 complaints of dogs off leash. 6 of those were resulted in citations. So the other 11 were verbal or written warnings. Up to when I put this the stats together last week in 2022, we've already hit 1,098 animal calls. 20 of those were dog off leash complaints called into us, and of those, 10 resulted in citations. As you can see down below, we are not, as our department goes, we rely heavily on education, trying to change patterns, educating the public, and working more with warnings to give people the opportunity to change their behavior. So rather than just write everybody a ticket right off the bat, we give people the opportunity to correct their behavior. Unfortunately, with us not being out there as often as we used to, the likelihood of us catching somebody twice in those violations has gone down. So pros and cons to that. Again, we're not a super heavy citation division, but it certainly does happen when we see that those circumstances totally justify a citation. So if they're, getting into it with other dogs, they're causing damage, they are, involved in fights, whether it's to people or animals, those citations are issued. As we look at, increased dog off leash nuisance complaints, mostly why it's addressed is because we end up with increased species complaints, increased dog conflicts. So dog to dog, where they're just running up, whether the off-leash dog is friendly or not. If they're running up to a not friendly dog who is on leash, it causes just as much of a conflict as an aggressive dog off leash. People conflicts. So, whether we're increasing in bites because people are trying to help and catch, somebody's dog who's not under control. If somebody's dog is truly aggressive, or if we're looking at it where, when we've had it where overly friendly dogs with no boundaries are jumping on people and knocking people over. We've had some elderly citizens have injuries because they got knocked over by overly friendly dogs. We see extra dog to wildlife conflicts with dogs off leash. We recently had a deer get severely injured and had to be put down by dogs off leash. Just chasing and doing dog things, but being totally out of control. And then we also look at the last one is either lost or injured dogs, mostly because, owners think, oh, my dog's good. And then they end up getting distracted, get overstimulated, they run off, they get, chasing that squirrel across the street, they get hit by a car, or quite simply, they just keep on going and they get completely lost. So we do end up with extra dog at large complaints where the dogs have completely gotten away from their owners as well. Again, our enforcement, we start with education. We let people know that there is a leash law in Laramie, unless they are on their private property, have permission from another private property owner to be on, a section of town that may or may not belong to them, but also, in a dog park. Those established dog parks that we have do get a lot of use, but outside of that, dogs inside city limits need to be on leash. So we let them know, what's required legally. If they're compliant, they've got their leash, they get all sorted out. Verbal warnings, we do document who we've been in contact with, and again, if we've had multiple contacts, or if they're being, if we have complaints about them being a nuisance and causing other offenses, we go ahead and go with the citations as well. Possible solutions would be us as animal control officers increasing patrol in these problem areas. The parks see the most traffic, but honestly, we see dogs off leash even through the neighborhoods. and that can cause just as many problems as the parks. But this would require increased animal control staffing. This is where we would look at bumping up by another officer, so that way we can patrol, and maintain those calls 7 days a week rather than 5. Because during our off hours, during our off days, it falls to the PD officers, and they have other priorities to deal with. It's one of those, they enforce all ordinances, but it's one of those that if they get a domestic call, they are not going to stop and talk to the dog off leash, person in the park. So then, like I said, increase our patrol, but then we would also look at coordinating with the Parks Department and increase our off-leash areas. So we would look at places that are safe for dogs, that are either fenced or away from high traffic areas. Certainly, I know in the past concerns about them being too close to playgrounds is always, a concern for people with kids. So we would look at all those different options and coordinate with Parks and Rec Advisory Board on what would be appropriate and available with those guys. And that's it.
Thank you for that. That's exactly the kind of overview I think we wanted to start the discussion here. So I don't know if council members have questions now, and I'm going to go to the vice mayor because the vice mayor has a question.
So first a comment. I want to say thanks to you guys for all your hard work. I was bitten by a dog a couple years ago, by an off-leash dog, and you guys were amazing. So thank you. The second thing, I'm wondering if we've had, or if you've had any discussions, or if we need to think at all about amending the ordinance to include the e-collars. If that has come up in your daily operation. Do you know what I mean when I say e-collar?
Yes, I'm very familiar with those.
Is that something we need to think about, or you haven't had any issues with that, or?
Right. So part of the reason why we went with the physical leash aspect, because that keeps the dogs closer to their people. So when they're out and they're still in sight of their people, but they're clear at the other end of the park, the reaction time of their owner is less. You look at the variability of the range of and reliability of those e-collars, and it still doesn't guarantee that the dog will come when it's called. Whether it's by the remote, using the beep or vibration to get their dog to recall, or if they pop them, it has to go with training. And so much like the regular recall, people are call their dogs to you or to them. If they're so engrossed in that squirrel or the other little dog, I have seen it regularly where they still just ignore that recall, even using the collar. So if you have physical control over your dog with a leash, even if they're not listening, you can still reel them in and get them away from whatever they're going for.
Okay. I guess mostly I was thinking perhaps there may have been a discussion with an owner of an e-collar making the comment that their dog is restrained or is leashed. And I was kind of wondering if we needed to add the e-collar in somewhere, noting that in the ordinance that that's not, that's not actually a leash.
Correct.
So.
We have had that discussion, and in the ordinance, it is written in there that it has to be a physical leash no longer than 10 feet.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Of course.
Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you very much. I think the worst part about this is education.
Councilmember Schuster, your audio, if you could turn that on for us or check out the situation there.
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. They must have forgot to turn the mics on. Education, I think, is the biggest part about this because I have a group of us, and we walk at Washington Park, and I think that's probably the biggest, it's one of the bigger parks, and it's where people ignore that leash law the most. They love the soccer area so they can have their dog fetching a ball or something like that. And just like you said, most of the time, if a dog runs towards me, I usually stop where I'm at and try to determine, is it going to attack or is it just want to see me, is the biggest thing. The leash laws all over this state are ignored, not just in the city limits of Laramie, but I know that most of our bicycle trails are in our city limits. Those are all supposed to be leash laws. If you go up to the Snowy Range Forest, it's absolutely leash law. If you go to Vidavoo, it's absolutely leash law. And probably 90% of the people ignore it. I know a couple of dogs that have been shot, and I felt bad for the owners. They even involved the sheriffs, and the sheriff said, "Was your dog on a leash?" They said, "No, we were on horseback." He asked them again, "Was your dog on a leash?" They said, "No." When your dog goes running up to someone, they have the right to defend themselves. So I know several dogs that have lost their lives because of this. But I think education is the biggest thing. I have friends, they treat their dogs as absolute family. And it's sad to see them lose a family member, but a lot of people feel that their dog doesn't have to be on a leash. It is not a vicious animal, and they just don't know. And I don't know how to get it through some people's mind. I don't want to use the word thick skull because that sounds not nice, but leash law is a law. Thank you.
Councilmember Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. I was just curious, and thank you for the presentation on how maybe to handle a situation that I ran into a couple of weeks ago when a skunk was hit on the side of the road, and it was in my driving distance going home. The smell was just horrible. So I called dispatch, and they said, "No problem, we'll take care of it." 24 hours later, the skunk is still there, still emitting a very atrocious odor. So I called again, and dispatch said, "Well, scavenger will probably take care of it." And I said, "Really? Oh, okay." So I didn't know, I didn't want to get into a big discussion about how to handle that situation, but maybe you can inform me and some of the other council members. Is that part of your duties to take care of a skunk like that was killed on the side of the road?
So inside city limits, animals hit by car, our priority is for the domestic animals, as those guys are owned inside city limits. We do also remove large wildlife such as deer, antelope, those guys who are more likely to cause an accident. Depending on our call loads and our availability, we can, we have removed the smaller wildlife, but it is not necessarily our priority because they don't typically cause accidents, impede traffic. And like I said, our priority is the domestics that are owned, and then the big guys that are more likely to cause other problems.
Well, a couple of days, I just happened to be driving by there, and somebody from animal control was picking up, and it was about 3 days. So, I mean, I'm just glad I didn't have to live in that area because the smell was really bad. So I was just wondering how that all worked out. Thank you.
Councilman Harrington.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, CSO Bingham. I was curious, maybe, and maybe Mayor or City Manager has some advice on this, but I'm pretty favorable to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board investigating other options or other ways in which we could use existing parks or existing open space to provide more options for folks to have their dogs off leash in sort of a semi-controlled situation. But I don't know what the process is like for referring that to them, and if the council would largely be favorable to that anyway.
I don't have anything for that other than to say that's certainly a channel that discussions can go through as the Parks Advisory Committee. But I think that the animal control folks and the LPD will have to be part of any discussion about that, since we're talking about changes. Well, we're talking about changes to where we allow those off leash activities. So I guess, I mean, it's primarily parks, but I'd want some advice probably from people about what they thought was a good idea. Council Member Harrington, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I think I'm just to maybe narrow it a little bit. Maybe I was too vague. I was speaking specifically to the recommendation that's in the PowerPoint of the Parks Tree and Rec Advisory Board could consider different. I think it's outlined in the ordinance that they're able to identify dog-friendly areas. So that's maybe the direction and the reasoning for them. I think obviously LPD would be, and animal control would be included, or at least that would be my expectation. I wasn't trying to exclude.
Oh no, I know. I was just kind of outlining that process out loud, but it does bring up another question I have, but I'm going to go to Councilmember Schmeckel. Oh, unless Assistant City Manager Feeser wants to weigh in on Councilmember Harrington's line
Absolutely.
of discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. So as you may recall or may have not seen, on last Tuesday, you guys had approved the Land Water Conservation Fund grant for Rotary Club's Park at Grandview Heights. And in the design of that, we do have another off-leash dog area that's fenced in. Right now, we have off-leash dog areas at Depot Park that is not fenced. I believe it's the area that's around the train that is designated as an off-leash dog area. However, in the new run or the new way that the world is going, I don't know that I'm actually a proponent of unfenced off-leash areas and look more towards fenced off-leash areas, simply because there's a little more security. The things that we've got to be cautious about is the added maintenance that it causes on staff and what it takes to get that done. But we are continuing to look at that. One other thing that we've got that's going to happen this winter is the dog park at Optimus is actually going to be expanded so that we can close it down in sections and not have it be closed entirely to users. So hopefully that'll help alleviate some of the situations. But we are open to different ideas. However, I lean more towards fenced-in dog areas rather than unfenced off-leash areas, to tell you the truth. Hope that helps. But we'll continue to look at those, Councilor Harrington.
So, Councilmember Schmeckel, if you'll allow me, I just want to ask a question that's related to this, and this is for Officer Bingham. Do we see a lot of calls, or even a fair amount of calls, about folks that have had some sort of situation with their dogs in the dog parks? Anecdotally, I know that I've heard from a few people that they actually don't like to go to the dog parks because they feel like people sort of just let their dogs go ape, if I can throw another animal into the mix here. And so they're not really comfortable taking their dogs to the dog park because they're not comfortable with the level of control that people have over their pets in those park areas where dogs are allowed off leash. Can you add some insight for us on that?
Right. I've certainly seen and heard both sides. For especially our high college kid population, it's really nice for them to have those off-leash dog parks because they don't have the fenced yards that many of our full-time residences do have. And even our full-time residents, they do tend to use those dog parks because it's a way for their dogs to socialize with other dogs, young, need to blow off some steam, that sort of scenario. But on the other hand, I have heard the complaints about people not paying attention to their dogs, of when they're being inappropriate, when they're playing too rough. And so it is just like people. Some dogs are very social and they would play with anybody. And then we have other dogs and other people that are like, no, I'll stay over here and I'll watch, or, I don't need to be in the middle of the party all the time. And I think part of that is just being a responsible dog owner, knowing what your dog's needs are and tailoring your expectations to your dogs and their needs as well. I think if we have more options, then we will have less concentration in one or two fenced parks. And like Todd brought up, having fenced areas is super important because it's safer. We look at Depot Park, and I've seen lots of use in Depot Park, but I know the one at Optimus gets a significant more use because it's safer. It's not right up against the train tracks, and it's set up to have the big and the smaller dog area. So that way there can be slower introductions and more appropriate dog interactions. So if we could basically not concentrate the dogs quite so much in the 3 dog parks that we have, I think that would probably promote better dog ownership and those better play groups in the long run.
Thanks for adding something to that. I appreciate that. Councilmember Schmeckel.
Thank you, Mayor. First off, I want to say thank you for the presentation here this evening, CSO. I will say that I usually reach out to a few folks whenever we have a work session that have knowledge in this topic area. And universally, they all brought up one point, and it was unanimous to everyone I reached out to this time, and that CSO Bingham is an amazing human being. And I appreciate that as well. That includes from the director of the Cheyenne Animal Shelter. So it's appreciated that your reputation goes that far and for being excellent at your job. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
I will say that I'm curious what the signage is like in some attractive areas for dog owners like the Sierra Sky Park or along the trails to kind of remind people that leashes are required.
Right. So usually to the entrances, most of the corners of the parks have some signage that say dogs, on leash. They have the little blurb about the ordinance number. And I know, in all honesty, I have not used the Sierra Sky Park. When I take my dogs out, we go way out. And so the signage up there, I know they were working on signage, but I don't know how much of that has been completed, in all honesty. That would maybe be a question for Todd.
Go ahead, City Manager.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor. But yeah, we need to look into that and see what our reminders look like. I know that we put up signs just about everywhere. I concern myself with sign pollution, but there's no reason we can't do a few extras at some of the locations.
So, do we have any other questions or follow-up or ideas for guidance for staff here? The extra sign suggestion, I think, is a good one. I like the idea of expansion of dog park opportunities, although I do recall that and this can sometimes be a challenging project and process for the Parks Committee because, of course, you start looking, okay, well, where do you want to go? And what kind of, I hate to use the term, give up parts of the park for this use, because I think it's a good use, and I don't think we should look at it that way, but I think some people do. They say, okay, well, if we're going to provide space here for more dog parks, we're taking away from other uses. But I think, Assistant City Manager, I think we have an opportunity in Laramie with a fairly good amount of parks that it's okay to take a look at this now and perhaps task the Parks Department and the advisory board to take a look at where we might expand some at this point, because it seems like with that uptick in concern and discussion we're getting about this, or at least we have been somewhat recently, that it's a good idea. Councilmember O'Doherty, I saw that you'd, okay. Do we have any other direction that we'd like to provide for staff at this time other than those two things? I don't know. I don't think staff, there's an interest in tearing apart the ordinance at this point. I think it's a pretty good and practical ordinance. I think the way that it's applied is practical and makes sense. I think it's kind of one of those issues, although maybe not as intense as parking. I think there's always going to be some issues that arise with how people, take care of their dogs and, what they do and don't allow their dogs to do. So there's not going to be a magical solution that's going to take care of all the problems. But I think those things that you've outlined for us do make sense. Some expansion and Assistant City Manager, I think we appreciate the support from maybe some signage, some more signage, strategically deployed makes sense too. Councilmember Cumby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much, CSO Bingham, for your presentation. And during the presentation, we're focusing primarily on dogs. And I would just like to comment that I have a 19-month-old Pyrenees who, and we use the dog parks, and we have found them very user-friendly, clean, and we've not had an issue yet. Where I did have an issue was walking one of the service alleyways, and a dog came running up off leash, and the woman says, "Don't worry, he's really friendly." And he goes up to my dog and grabs her neck. So, yeah, so we had a discussion about keeping her dog on leash. What I wanted to ask you about was cats. And there's been a number of special news pieces on NPR, on Science Friday, etc., talking about the impact of cats to wildlife, to birds specifically, to general biodiversity. And when I walk the neighborhood, it seems like cats pretty much have free reign. And so I'm just curious what you all do about that, or do you wait for someone to complain that a cat's stalking a bird feeder and then put a trap in, or I just wonder what we can do about the cats to help educate the public about the impact that cats can have on the bird and small animal population.
No, that's a very good question. So in our ordinances, dogs and cats are treated the same as far as the at-large portion of things. So they still need to maintain on your property or be under your control. Unfortunately, cats don't abide those boundaries the same as dogs do. They look at a fence as a challenge versus something as containment. So people who do let their cats out, very few of them supervise or keep their cats in their yard appropriately. Part of that is a very Western Wyoming mentality, where many ranchers, they have the cats, they mouse, they take care of unwanted pests, and they come home at night and they call it good. So changing that idea that cats need to at least be home. They don't have to stay inside all the time, but at least be on your own property is a hard mentality to change all the way around. The enforcement, so I can call a dog up, who's wandering down the street. I can give him a couple cookies, put a leash on him, and in the truck we go. Cats, you do hear kitty kitty, and they swish their tail, and they keep on going. So cats, in order to catch them, are a little bit tougher, just because of their dexterity and their ability to go into the bushes and over fence lines, and those escape routes are much easier for cats. We do respond to cat at large calls. If we see them, if I'm, it happens less common because we're doing much less patrolling. But if I'm out and I'm in between calls and a cat pops out in front of me, I will try to catch it, because our ordinances do pertain to, cats the same as dogs. So I treat them all the same. It's not, we don't ignore it because it's a cat. It's just harder to catch because it's a cat. Yes.
I'm wondering, do you think we need to do more public education, such as put little informational pieces on the city website from time to time? Do you think any of that might be helpful?
It certainly won't hurt. It's one of those that on our Facebook page we have in the past, and we can certainly increase that again, as far as putting our ordinances up. Do a little blurb about cats staying home, their impact on wildlife, longevity. We see more kitties, that obviously get hit by car or stuck up in engine compartments, and other injuries while they're out and about, than obviously if they were at home. So we can certainly increase the public education portion of things. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for us to see frequent flyer cat at large.
I have one more question. And in the materials that we got, and also in your presentation, you've pointed out that due to budgetary constraints, that the personnel FTEs had to be reduced. And because of that, number one, you've gone from 7 days to 5 days. Number two, there is less coverage, while at the same time, as the mayor said, there's been a slight uptick in calls to you. And just thinking about planning for the future, is it your perception that we need to think about that personnel structure again, what our goals are, and to revisit that sometime in the future?
That would be fantastic, in all honesty. By dropping by an officer, we took on many of the duties that our previous supervisor used to do. So our abilities to do all of these tasks have been crunched down to the minimum of our ability to be productive, but also efficient in what we can do. And so we focused more on shelter. Like, we still obviously respond to calls, and we're seeing more calls. We're starting, like you said, that uptick. But we have taken more of a priority to be in the shelter versus out patrolling, because if we don't adopt out those animals that we're bringing in or that are surrendered to our shelter, then we're not doing the other portion of our job. We have to make sure everybody that we have in our care has everything that they need.
Okay, thank you very much, CSO Bingham. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you do and the work of the shelter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other discussion, questions? City Manager, I'd like to ask you a question, which is based around the fact that I think you receive most of these same emails that the council gets when we receive these different types of input from Laramie residents. Has it been your experience that these complaints ebb and flow in terms of the volume of them that we get over time? Is there anything different about the uptick that we have most recently seen, or is it just the latest example of that ebb and flow around these kinds of complaints with dogs in the city?
Mayor, I think our CSO Bingham would be well equipped to answer sort of the cyclical nature of calls. But I'll share with you, in my experience and in my opinion, we do tend to see more of those kinds of calls in the summer, I think, generally, when people are out more frequently with their pets and more active. And then also it does seem to me they're, like many things in Laramie, cyclical and ebbing and flowing as our population ebbs and flows. Students coming back to school, maybe getting a pet for the first time and learning the rules of the road or the rules of pet ownership. So summer and fall to me seem awfully busy. And I certainly would appreciate Teresa's input if she has a different opinion or wants to add to what I've said.
Yeah, as would I. Go ahead, Officer Bingham. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's absolutely correct. Our summer times are super busy, and fall with students coming back, their animals are learning the new fences, they're learning how to take care of their pets appropriately, keep them home, that sort of stuff. But then on the other side, we end up seeing more animal cruelty complaints, dogs left out in the cold, lots of, those welfare checks in the wintertime especially when the wind is blowing and the weather sucks. So we trade off one portion for the other. The other thing that we're seeing post-COVID is a lot of people did a whole lot of adoptions. So our overall animal ownership across the board has gone up in the general population. So more people have gotten those animals, post-COVID, and then we're seeing a higher portion of our students that have emotional support animals. So those that weren't previously allowed in the dorms are now getting dogs, cats, other critters, which are also impacting our program and our call load. As far as welfare checks, as far as animals at large, and our general nuisance complaints, whether it's barking or feces or any of that. So we're seeing that slow uptick again based on our animal ownership portion of things.
Thank you. I see that Councilmember O'Doherty's got her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've heard of a complaint. A constituent said that she frequently encounters dogs off leash and kind of aggressive on campus, on like around Television Road or near the Armory. If the dog's on campus, do we have any jurisdiction?
Primary jurisdiction there is UW's PD. But it also falls within the city limits as well. So there is some cooperation there, primarily where they make sure and cover is Prexy's and that direct on campus. Certainly we have the little dog park there up near the ball fields, which is right in that same area as all of UW's property. So there's a little bit of give and take there.
So who should they call if they observe this aggressive dog there again? The city, yes. Maybe?
Yep, so if they call just the non-emergency dispatch, depending on where the property is, they will send that person, either we will get dispatched. If it's in the soccer fields, then it would be UW. If it's on the roads, it would be us.
Thank you.
Other questions? Chief Brown, I'd like to call on you and ask you to exercise a little bit of your outside perspective, having a lot of experience in a different community. Your thoughts on the way this ordinance is set up? We've had a pretty excellent review of it this evening and some discussion about it. Do you see anything there in terms of revisions or changes that you think might help us address this? Or is it, as I suspect it is, just one of those things, it has that cyclical nature, it ebbs and flows, and we just need to keep tabs on it, and there isn't necessarily much we can do at this time? What do you think, Chief?
So again, I think public engagement is a huge part of this, and that's one of the things that we've been looking to do. And Teresa actually came up with some great slides that we're currently posting on the city and the police department social media. The first one went out today on the city social media, thanks to the assistant city manager, and that's to council member Gabriel's point. So I think we have a very transient population because of the college. So I think there is a huge amount of education that needs to come with that, and we can work with our partners at the UWPD to make sure that that information in our ordinance is getting passed on to their incoming freshmen and students as they beginning attending the university. But as it's written, I think it's a good one. I also am a big fan of gated dog parks. I think it protects the city liability wise. It gives one entrance point that's clearly labeled and has the clear boundaries of what they're allowed to do within the dog park, and that kind of gives the owner an idea of what to expect when they enter the property, as opposed to unfenced dog parks where it's very hard to make sure that an individual has clear expectations going into that area unless they enter certain points.
You would make any recommendation about changes to enforcement or anything of that nature, would you?
Outside of maybe adding at least retrieving the one additional position that we did have, I think that gives us the ability to have 7 day a week coverage. While it wouldn't be 24 hours a day, it does give us a bigger scan and also the availability of more or animal control officers to be on call on the hours that they're not working.
I appreciate that. And of course, council, that's where we start to get into where budget meets
Sure.
our desire to try to update that. But I appreciate that, Chief. Thank you very, very much. Council,
Thank you.
Anything else before we go to public input? All right, why don't we see if there's any public input about this work session topic? Incoming Councilmember Richardson, I see you're there. If you have thoughts, feel free to share them. If you don't want to right now, that's of course understandable and acceptable. Outside of that, Council, I don't really see anyone in attendees requesting public comment. So I'll go back to Council and staff for one more second on this, if there's anything else before we move on to our next work session topic. Officer Bingham, you've heard it several times and I'll repeat it. Thank you very much for putting some time and effort into that presentation on top of everything else you're already doing for us. We really appreciate your presence at this meeting to give us kind of the most important perspective probably that we're going to hear this evening on it. So your work is definitely appreciated, and I appreciate that you told us a little bit about the shelter and how that's kind of the priority right now, and that seems as it should be given the staffing realities. And we would, of course, be open to the thoughts or ideas that you might have or things that occur to you that might be helpful. You know, let us know and let the city management team know and everyone else if there's anything that comes up in your mind after this that might help. I think actionable stuff, Council, that we heard about is 3 things. Taking a look at fenced dog area increases. Assistant City Manager talked to us about that, and we'll see where we can go with that. Some signage increases, and then of course maybe taking a look at those things that touch on budget and seeing what we might be able to do with that, and we'll work with the other folks that have input on that to take a look at it. Seeing no other hands up or concerns, I think we'll move on to the next. We'll close this part of the work session with our thanks again to everyone and move on to the next topic for our work session, which is going to be the cemetery operations, Green Hill Cemetery operations and staff. And we've got a chance to go back and talk to Assistant City Manager Feeser. So thank you.
Honorable Mayor, thanks for that. Actually, tonight I'm going to turn it over to Scott Hunter, the Parks Manager, who has a long history with Green Hill Cemetery, and we'll be able to give you a nice presentation on the operations and some upcoming items that we have ahead of us. So I'll turn it over to Scott Hunter at this time.
Welcome back, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. I've worked at the Green Hill Cemetery almost the majority of my work life. I started out in 1994 as a provisional employee, was hired on in 1999. I worked until probably 2015 or so, and then I kind of moved on towards the parks. Do we have that PowerPoint?
City Clerk will be getting that up in just a second for you. There it is.
Bear with me, council members. Green Hill Cemetery. Green Hill Cemetery was formally ratified around 1881, 1882. There are a few different versions of that story. Currently, there's about 46 acres of property. Originally, all the property just east of the cemetery, clear to 22nd Street, was cemetery property. In the 60s, the city of Laramie and the University of Wyoming had a land swap deal. And so the city got some property just west of Laramie, and the university got more property in town to kind of meet their needs. Currently, the University of Wyoming surrounds Green Hill Cemetery. And I get a lot of individuals asking why the university has a cemetery and when it's actually a municipality-run cemetery. If you kind of look at it there, there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of headstones, and there's a lot of mowing going on here. If we go to the next slide, please. Cemetery staff at Green Hill Cemetery. So we have 2.5 full-time staff members. And when I say full-time, we have one supervisor who runs the cemetery as a whole, budgetary, equipment procurement, whatever you can think of monetary wise. That supervisor also runs one full-time employee, just a maintenance worker, and one half-time, 20-hour-a-week employee, who is the face of the cemetery, Judy. She is what we would consider a sexton, even though her job title is account clerk. And so she deals with the public on a daily basis, making sure the deeds are there, making sure any burial records or whatnot are on point. When we get contacted by funeral homes or families, she's the first one to get that ball rolling. The Green Hill Cemetery has more than 23,000 grave spaces within this 46 acres. Over the summer months, we hire anywhere between 5 and 7. Our normal hire is 6 to maintain everything that we do in the cemetery. That equates to about 375 graves for each employee every single day through April through September. And that includes mowing, trimming, irrigation, aeration, you name it. When it comes to tree maintenance, irrigation, mowing, trimming, all that has to be done on a daily basis. Can we go ahead and move to the next one? This is just a few pictures that Lonnie put together for this PowerPoint. Mowing, trimming, one of the issues that we've been running into the last few years are deer and animal populations in the cemetery. The public really likes animals when they're here wandering around. It kind of gives them a little bit of, that outdoor mountain spirit. We find that the deer have a tendency to damage small trees and bushes. They eat new flowers. I've actually had a few deer rutting and rubbing up on some larger headstones and knocked them over. It's just something that we have to deal with. We have talked with Game and Fish over the years to try to keep them out of here. But because we are now surrounded by the University of Wyoming and traffic, trying to push them out of the cemetery sometimes causes more issues than just keeping them in the cemetery. And so we kind of let them come and go as long as they're not doing anything too bad. If we do have a funeral set up that particular day, we try to kind of push them to a different part of the cemetery. Acts of nature, everybody knows Wyoming, Laramie. We've seen a lot of snowstorms, a lot of heavy rains, and we have to deal with trees falling and some flooding in some locations every so often. You don't think about it, but when you get a lot of water, some of the older graves before, say, 1981, 1980, those graves begin to sink and collapse. And so during the summer months, staff has to go around and make sure that, the turf is safe, and we don't complaining that their gravesite for a loved one is in poor repair. So we put a lot of effort into trying to maintain the cemetery as a whole. Funeral services, it all runs down from laying out the grave space. As you can see, we have a metal template right there. They're about 4 feet by 8 feet. Normal grave space is anywhere from, it's like 4.5 feet by 10 feet. So we have about 2 feet for a headstone or a memorial stone to be sitting on. That helps as we go down, as we go through time, that if that grave does settle, that headstone usually will not settle with it. Sometimes we have to do disinterments, which is not my favorite thing to do, but it's a service that we offer. We have one right here that's just short. So when you do a disinterment, you have to have a lot of people around. You have to have the county coroner. You have to have the local funeral professionals around here to make sure that we're doing it correctly, and that someone can take possession of the remains. We can go ahead and go on to the next one. This is one of our large projects that we did a few years ago. So the cemetery as a historical space, we have a lot of headstones and memorial stones from the late 1880s, early 1900s. We tried our best to keep those in good repair. This one here is one of the major bath lots. We had just doing weather and a large heavy metal gate break one of the posts, one of these nice stone posts off. So staff went out there, dug everything up, pulled the post out, put some pins in it, sanded it all, glued it back together, sanded it all down and reset it and put everything back the way that it should be. After this project was done, we came to the conclusion that we should not put that big heavy gate back on because the potential of that piece breaking again in the future is pretty high. But this was a pretty decent project for the cemetery staff. It is basically, I hate to say it this way, but it's Christmas for the cemetery. Everybody shows up on 3 days of the year. I mean, we'll get family members and whatnot pretty much all year round, but Green Hill Cemetery is pretty much packed on the Memorial Day weekends. We do have the Avenue of Flags that we set out for all the holidays. We did cut one of the holidays just due because it was the middle of winter time. Everything was iced up and it was hard getting those flags up and down in a timely manner. But for Memorial Day weekend, that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we have staff in to make sure that the flags are flying and everything's cleaned up. Also, our sexton is in to help families find locations. And if there are any questions, we can have staff available to go out there and show them what they needed. It's also our #1 time that we get complaints or work orders. And those all range from headstones being a little shifted due to ice underneath them, sunken graves. There's trees, shrubs. Sometimes the family members will have planted something years ago or that are no longer there. We try to assist in putting those back in. We take a great pride in this. But it's also the one holiday during the year that we all get a lot of gray hair because we know we're going to get complaints and we have to be pretty cognizant about trying to keep up on those. 5-year burial average. When I first started working in the cemetery, we averaged about 10 funerals a month. And so if you look back in 1996, 103 vault burials, 25 ash. Unfortunately, 4 children burials that year, but that was our average. We would see a little bit more during the summertime, less in the wintertime. I'm not sure why that is. If you go clear to 2021, you're looking 65 ashes this year, 33 vaults, 2 baby burials. We're averaging just over 7.8 burials currently. So, I mean, the trend, ashes are getting more common, vaults are getting less common. #1, that has to do with some of the old thinking for burials has kind of gone away. The newer thinking is it's a little bit more cost effective. You can have utilize more space in the cemetery. We actually allow 1 full-size vault and 3 cremains per space, or 3 or 4 cremains per space. And that basically that's how many headstones we could set on that space if they decided to have each headstone themselves. But as you look there, the data is showing that around 2013, 2012, that the ashes and the vaults kind of swap spaces. So we're just seeing more cremain burials these days and less vault burials. 6 years just continues the trend. 60% of all the burials have been vaults, 37% have been cremains. Unfortunately, every year we see at least one child or baby up here. That's one of the harder funerals that we have to deal with. Go ahead and switch to the next one. The last 8 months, we're on par. Fortunately, this last summer, we saw a huge influx of funerals. We had 27 for the month of June, 15 for the month of July, and 18 for the month of August. We're still averaging our normal, 8 funerals a year currently. But when you're trying to get mowing and trimming and trying to get everything else taken care of during the summertime and you start getting a high amount of funerals, it gets problematic with trying to get everything done in a timely and efficient manner. So Green Hill Cemetery contains just over 23,000 platted burial spaces. There are a few organizations that own rights to many of these, and that includes the Catholic Church, Masons, Independent Order of Odd Fellows. We don't sell those spaces. We can show those spaces, and we work hand in hand with those organizations. We do collect the perpetual perpetual care fees and the burial fees for these. So we don't. Those spaces are off limits to our sexton to sell. The city currently owns 1,092 spaces for future burials, and they're kind of scattered throughout the old cemetery. They're spaces that families have sold back to the city. We have a few areas that aren't very popular, like the 120 section I'll show you here in a couple minutes. And so that 1,092, you think, oh, that's a lot of a lot of barrels. Space, that equates to 4,368 barrels that we have left in the city-owned properties. So the current projections show about 38 years to completely fill city-owned open spaces. And if you factor in the Catholic Church, Masons, and Oddfellow properties, that extends the useful life of the cemetery at least another 25, depending on how the cremains and the vault burials continue to trend. So here, property owners, the Catholic Church, the Catholic Diocese, the Catholic Church, they own a large section of the property. Over the years, we work hand in hand. They haven't been very good about keeping track of their records, and so staff regularly goes to their offices and double checks. We make sure that the deeds are getting filed properly, because if we have a family, the worst thing we can do is a family comes in for a burial. They don't have a deed that's been recorded at the courthouse. We can't open that space until that deed's been recorded legally. So then we have to go through the Catholic Church. They have to find all their records, which they don't keep very well. And we normally have to reissue a deed for that particular family. The Masons and the Oddfellows have been pretty good about keeping track of all their burials. And they are always asking us to make sure that whenever a funeral or a burial is scheduled, that we're okay with that. And we're always part of any burial that comes up. So in the past couple of years, we started looking at columbarium. Columbarium basically is a large structure that we can continue to put cremains in. And so a lot of people will probably look at some of the data and say, well, why are we looking at this right now? And as we move forward, there's a couple in the cemetery that aren't very desirable for the public to go after. So this is what we call the 120s. It's the northeasternmost corner of the cemetery, which has the university power plant right there, their filling station, a couple new classroom building type things over there. I think they're for like ranches or whatnot. They're their new business building over there. But we find that nobody wants to go look at that property for burials. They want to be closer to the university, AA, or they want to be, closer to their family members in the more of a forest, urban, or an urban forest environment. If you ever show up here to the cemetery, and I would invite any city council members to come up and take a quick walkthrough with myself or staff, just to look at some of these sites, you'll understand why a lot of people don't like this area. But that particular area is 200 single spaces. One space can hold 4 cremains, so we have the ability to put up 800 burials in that space max. You can go forward. So we went out for RFPs just recently. Steiner Thusen sent us a few designs. This is one of the designs that we really liked. This particular columbarium setup really kind of focuses on beautifying that area, creating more of a garden spot and less of an open area. We had to find the fencing around our particular cemetery currently, the way the wind blows, snow, development, what we could do to try to block off some of the visual sites of the university. So currently, I think with the design that we have the capability of 1,400 burials, with future additions to increase that by another 1,400 if we need to. Phase 1, trellis at the entrance, modular columbaria. And one thing I hate about columbariums is the chest of drawers look. I really hate just a big flat stone with a bunch of niches in it. So everything that we want to look at will have some curves, will have a little bit of dimension to it, will have some height, some varying heights. We find that as we polled other cemeteries, a lot of families really like about the face level and about hip level. A lot of the lower levels aren't very desirable, but by including more design elements, I think we have a way of being able to utilize all those spaces. Also, we're going to offer a couple of options of boulders, inset, and some other burials around the actual columbaria itself. But phase one will be kind of, we'll be looking at irrigation, grading of the site, concrete base, subsurface footers, getting all the infrastructure in. So when we do need to add those columbarium, that we have the space to do it safely. Phase 1, 2, and 3 in total phase cost. Now, we just had a little meeting last week or so about the Land Water Conservation Fund, about a new park going in over at Grandview Heights, and that was $1.6 million. The total build for a columbarium matches that park, about $1.6 million. That first phase one total, just under $600,000, would get everything set up for any future builds. One of the things that I really had to think about on this is I know that the city of Laramie is moving a little bit towards the north. We do have property here and there, and there's always a potential that we open up another cemetery plot in some location. Like this would probably push the need for that out another 25, 30 years. So, but with that being said, prices also always go up. And so, I mean, it's just something that if we do move forward with this and I come up with council again, we'll have to have this discussion in earnest. With that, I'm going to open it up for any questions. I hope I didn't ramble on too much and bore you all.
Scott, that was great. Don't worry about that at all. Thank you. And we do have a question from Councilmember O'Doherty.
First, I wanted to thank you for taking into account the columbaria and making it a place of beauty and peace. I think that's really nice for families. It's also nice for those of us that don't have families there when we go for Memorial Day, or just to have a peaceful place to contemplate the people that came before. And I also want to point out that the plantings and all were helping to capture carbon. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I just want to say that. Thanks.
Other questions or input for Mr. Hunter about the presentation and some of the long-term issues he touched on? Mr. Hunter, I'm disturbed to hear that the deer are also not following the leash laws. That sounds like a big problem. I'm not sure what we're going to do about it. I've got Councilmember Schuster.
Thank you. Yes, and they don't at my house either. My wife goes and runs and chases them away when she sees them on our doorbell camera. So it's kind of funny. I appreciate what he does. My father is out there. I have a plot out there. I attend Memorial Day services every year out there. Also would like to make the comment that Wreaths Across America will be there December 16th. And we'll be doing our yearly placing of the wreaths on veterans' graves. So I don't know if that's very well publicized, so I will make that statement because I'll be working that day on that project. So, and I appreciate what you do, and thank you very much.
Other questions or input? I don't think it's often spoken about here on council, but I think that cemetery, Green Hill Cemetery in Laramie, is widely considered to be a very well maintained and pretty area in the city of Laramie. I know sometimes people, when they can, when it's open and available, like to just take a walk through there because it is a very nice spot and it is a very nice place. And, you know, that's not everybody's cup of tea to do that, but I know people that do, and they appreciate it and appreciate the level of investment and time that goes into the maintenance of that. And again, I just don't think that's recognized all that often, Mr. Hunter. And I think, although it isn't frequently spoken about, it's often appreciated by a lot of Laramie residents. Again, that's that level of investment and time and caretaking that goes into the cemetery. I think I can say that with 100% confidence. Why don't we see if there's comment, public comment? Seeing no request for public comment, we'll go back and just say I appreciate again, as you've heard from other members of the council, sort of the long-term outline that you gave us, and I think that's something that should be sort of on the planning list, as you say, depending on what we see in the next couple of years, and needs to be in the mix, and I think it is, and appreciate your outlining that for us tonight. So, with no further comments or questions, and nothing further from Mr. Hunter or Mr. Feeser on the Green Hill Cemetery, we'll move on in our work session. Which council members, that'll take us to, just a second. Just your updates and comments. Councilmember Cumby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Update on the Board of Health. We met this past week, received a report, and there are currently no issues. We had been working with an issue. I won't name the business, but they have since gone out of business, so that problem is gone. The Disability Advisory Board met, and for the second time, we did not have a quorum, but we just had a brainstorming session. We decided that we will be surveying the membership related to availability to try and make sure that we have people who currently do have time to participate, and that we think that we have some very valuable people that if they don't have time to be on the board, we're considering a category of board community associate so they can continue to participate. They'd be non-voting, but can continue to give us input related to disability and accessibility. And our plan for the next year is to expand our role and function to receive, assess, and report complaints and concerns to the city. And in the public education events that in which we participated, the number one issue related to accessibility, no surprise, happens to be our sidewalks. And we know of two local residents over the age of 50 who stumbled, fell in the downtown area, and received broken bones as a result of that. One person I think many of us know very well. And what we'd like to do is to try and monitor, are there specific areas that are problematic so that we might address that, especially starting in the downtown area or in areas that have high traffic. And then the last piece I'd like to report on is related to our COVID response work. And Jane and I have continued to monitor kind of the state of things. And we've pretty much stayed in the green since mid-June. We had a spike in mid-July. And most of our state is currently in the green or very low risk. We have Platte County is the only one that is high risk, with Natrona, Converse, and Goshen at medium. Other than that, our state is at low risk. Our vaccination rates remain pretty low, around 65% for one dose, 57% for 2 doses. The booster is only at 29%, And the most recent bivalent booster, as is the trend throughout the United States, we are less than 10%. So people are not really responding to that, and it may be that our efforts would be better spent promoting vaccination, because people who are fully vaccinated, though they may get COVID infection, tend to have very mild effects from that. So really one of the number one defenses against serious illness is to be vaccinated. So we're considering looking at that. One of the concerns that is coming out of CDC right now, they're calling a triple demic. And that is that the co-occurrence throughout the nation right now of RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, influenza, and COVID. And down in Denver and at Children's Hospital, they are having a significant problem with the numbers coming in, and are having difficulty. Our hospital numbers have started to spike in the last 2 weeks, and so we need to continue to follow that. The wastewater has been congruent with the report of active infection, in that we have basically been at low risk or going down. We had a spike toward the end of in the wastewater at the end of October, which 2 weeks later was followed by a 3-day spike of infection, and then went back down. And currently, this past week, there's a slight spike, so we might see a little something, but we're really doing a good job right now with the infection. And we think that turning our activities more toward encouraging vaccination may be the most efficient way to work with the community. And that's the end of my report, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Councilmember Cumby about any of that? Councilmember Cumby, I have a little bit of feedback for you, I think, which is that I think you can inquire with the city manager or the city clerk about options for boards and commissions to change their meeting times. I do believe there is an option there. I don't know if the full council has to weigh in on that, but if that's part of the issue you're having with your quorums and your meeting attendance, I think you can explore some options there. City Clerk, I don't know if you have any immediate feedback about that, but I do know that's certainly a possibility your committee can explore.
Yeah, Mayor, if the Laramie Advisory Commission on Disabilities took a vote with a new date time for those meetings, then we could bring it back and add that into their bylaws and have City Council approve the updated date and time.
And as we survey members, we do plan to ask, is it about the time? Is it about the day? And to try and see if there's something that we can do. We did look at our bylaws, and our bylaws state the day, but not necessarily the time. So that could be adjusted, I think, just within the committee. But we are looking at that to try to make it at a time that would be more available. But to ask people if I know some have obtained full-time employment, which just may be a little much at this point in time, but we'd still like to maintain the association because they're contributing members.
Thank you. And also, Councilmember Cumby, I think I can share with you that the city has a standing policy at the moment of upgrades to the downtown curb issues that you outlined. As infrastructure projects present themselves to that area, I believe we try to address those accessibility issues as those projects come along. And I think we'll be seeing an opportunity. I'd, of course, ask the city manager to help me with this, but I think we'll be seeing an opportunity for some changes and updates on things along 3rd Street as that major infrastructure project presents itself in the next couple of years. But I believe the policy is to, when the opportunity presents itself, to upgrade those curbs so that those accessibility issues are addressed. That's the most cost efficient and time efficient way that we've identified to be able to do that. City manager, am I correct in that recollection?
Mayor, you are correct.
And so, Councilmember Cumby, what we hope to see is opportunities to do exactly some of what you've had suggested to you to take a look at. Unfortunately, the bad part of that is, of course, we're somewhat bound by working with other infrastructure projects as they come along, because budgetarily that's the best we're able to do with that. But at least there is a plan in place, so you could possibly share that. It doesn't help people who have fallen and broken bones this winter, which we hate to hear about, but there is, of course, a plan in place to try to address some of those issues.
And what we would like to do is work closely with city staff. And we think that what we could help do would be to identify maybe some key problematic areas, if that's possible, and then to work with city staff on that. So we would be more information gatherers.
That makes sense, and I think you'll have some opportunity to do that moving forward. That might be something to think about as you move into the beginning of the year with your next iteration of council. Council members have been waiting. Thank you. I just kind of wanted to touch on those two pieces that I thought were very important from Councilmember Cumby's update. And of course, I think we're all keen to hear about the ongoing monitoring. So thanks again, Councilmember Cumby. COVID situation monitoring. Hopefully things will continue to go in the right direction. Councilmember Harrington and Schmeckel, I don't know who's up first. So is somebody super eager to go? Because I don't recall. Okay, Councilmember Schmeckel, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I can be very brief. The Laramie Beautification Committee has recently undergone a leadership vote, and congratulations to Ray Cascow for taking on that leadership mantle. They've got some very significant shoes to fill with Margaret Brown stepping down from the role, who's been leading in that position for quite a while and leaves a significant record of getting some projects done and making Laramie a better place. So thanks to Margaret Brown and congratulations to Ray Cascow.
Thank you, Councilmember Schmeckel. Absolutely. I want to extend those same sentiments. Councilmember Harrington.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be brief as well. Public Art Coalition met a couple weeks ago, and I think of interest to the council. They have identified, and I think planning staff identified this issue as well in our process for basically swapping landscaping for public art as a development option. There are a few gaps in our policy that planning staff and the Public Art Coalition's executive director are working together to potentially bring recommendations to the council for ways in which we might close those gaps to ensure that that program works. They aren't significant, but there are some changes that need to likely be made. And the Public Art Coalition is also seeking board members. So if anybody out there is listening and is interested in public art, that board is seeking, as are many of our boards perennially. But in particular, at this moment, they're looking for that. And then I guess just by way of a quick update, on the airport board, just for a new appointment, we have Commissioner Gosar and I discussed Tracy Fletcher's term has expired on the board, but we are re-upping her and recommending that for approval. And I just wanted to give you all that update that the board does still require Tracy's expertise. So he and I agreed that this was the direction to go. So you'll be seeing that. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. I've got Councilmember O'Doherty and then Councilmember Gabriel. Councilmember O'Doherty.
We may want to talk about the same thing. Councilor Gabriel, do you want to update the group on the CAP meeting?
Exactly. That's what I had in front of me.
I would like Councilor Gabriel to take it then.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and if you have anything to add afterwards, I'll go to you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Councilmember Gabriel, thank you.
You bet, thanks. Next Tuesday night, 6 to 8 on Zoom, there's a special information work session on the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan involving Laramie Planning Commission, Albany County Planning and Zoning, City County Environmental Advisory Committee, along with the steering committee from the city county. It will be an informational discussion of all three boards, facilitated by Mark Stacy from Sandtech, who's put together the aquifer protection draft plan right now. It's gone through a revision from the one that was previously put out, and since updated from public comment during the fall. And so that's going to be a discussion between all of these groups, and that will be on Zoom, and everyone is invited to attend if you so desire. Next Tuesday, 6 to 8. Did I miss anything, Aaron?
I just want to add that there'll be a lot of people there of these three groups, but council can be there, but I hope we don't try to dominate. I personally hope that we'll let our committees do their work. Thanks.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I've rarely, if ever, seen that from our council in attendance at those meetings, but I do think from an information perspective, there's a lot of value in going to those and seeing the general drift of discussion there. So I plan on going there too. I think that'll be worthwhile. And I thank you both for your continued diligence on and serving on that subcommittee and keeping us up to date on that. I really do appreciate it.
Councilor Cumby's on the committee too.
Thank you, Councilor Cumby. A lot of committee work from Councilor Cumby. It's hard to remember. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just curious if that meeting is recorded so that we can watch it later if we don't make it to that meeting.
City Clerk says yes.
Thank you.
City Clerk, want to thank you for your efforts in facilitating those meetings too. Majorly important. Council, we have other updates. Council, if you'll allow it, I would take, with your permission, just a moment to acknowledge a really extreme and tragic situation unfolding in our neighbor state just to the south there in Colorado Springs this weekend. And in response to a few Laramie community members outreach, and also, if you don't mind, I'll just tell you a quick story. You know, I was watching a news program last night, and there was a Colorado Springs advocate and leader in issues about and surrounding the LGBTQ community in that Colorado city. And the broadcaster asked a question and said, well, you know, I think a lot of people are feeling impacted and feeling disturbed and grieving about this, but they're not really sure what should be done or what can be done with respect to trying to make that message or make those feelings known in some type of message. And what this advocate said is that maybe one of the most important things to do, aside from acknowledging the grief and trauma of yet another shooting incident, is just to reaffirm that that's a community that shouldn't feel unheard or unseen, and further have its sense of marginalization increased, but instead be recognized as a community that exists in all places, certainly in our city here in Laramie, and across the nation, everywhere. That's a community that's one that we want to feel fully integrated and safe in every city and in every town and in every public space, and that although we continue to have struggles and problems with violence and targeted violence and bigotry, we take comfort in the fact that we don't believe that will always be the case, and that that's a situation that's changing. And although the weekend event was, of course, a terrible and grim reminder that we're nowhere near where we want to be with that, in terms of every citizen feeling safe no matter where they are, we're going to continue to work towards that goal, and that we grieve with those victims and their families, and we're sorry, and also have a degree of trauma from having to see yet another example of that type of crime and incident take place, and we just want to give some voice to it. And I think it's appropriate that we do that just a minute here as the city council. And I hope I speak for all of you, and I believe that I do when I say that, of course, we can condemn any kind of bigoted, targeted violence, and once again feel sadness at having to acknowledge another event of that nature, and hope that we can work towards a day when those things are not just less common but non-existent. However long that may take, we want to commit ourselves to that goal. So having said that, and I appreciate your patience with that, but I think you all understand why it's of importance to do that in this type of situation. Do we have any other council comments, input, or updates before we just quickly go through our agenda? Okay, thank you very much. And we don't have an attached agenda for review, it appears, City Clerk, due to the calendar for the holiday. And so with that said, to your relief, council, I believe we can close this work session, and I want to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you at the CAP meeting, if not at the next meeting. Take care of yourselves. Thank you very much.
Everyone have a happy Thanksgiving
you.
and
Good
drive
night.
safe.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
holidays.
Bye.